Hi guys, G-Economics here once again, and this is my revision video, sort of predicted questions, if you like, for the June 2016 F582 paper, and this is for those of you who are resitting probably F582, having already probably done it once last year. And this is the national and the international economy paper. As I did with F581, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the previous 3 sessions exams for this paper. The general rule of thumb is that anything in the previous 3 sessions won't be repeated on the June 2016 paper, and so we can rule out what has gone before and possibly then rule in things which may appear on this occasion. So June 2015, the case study was all about Argentina and the US of A, the economies of Argentina and the US of A. And these are the areas of the specification which were assessed on the June 2015 paper. Define the price level, identify reasons why CPI may be inaccurate, calculate a percentage of GDP. So 2 things there, ladies and gentlemen. Number 1, remember to bring a calculator. But number 2, make sure that you can calculate a simple percentage. As A-level economists, you obviously ought to be able to do that. Identify reasons for increasing government spending, so a little bit of fiscal policy there. Comment on whether increasing government spending, will always lead to inflation. As to compare trends in the data between Argentina and the US of A. Now remember, for comparisons, feel happy, feel confident, feel at ease with calculating averages, and make sure that when you're comparing, you need to be using words like higher and lower, faster and slower. That's you comparing data when you do that. Comment whether increasing employment will lead to an increase in investment. Explain why a government would want to prevent a decrease in AS, aggregate supply. Now, I would say to you, there's nothing wrong with talking about the Keynesian aggregate supply curve, you know, your L-shaped supply curve. But due to problems I've experienced, certainly with my candidates in the past when they've submitted papers with that on it, I would say to you, try and always use LRAS, long run aggregate supply, as your abbreviation for that. Define protectionism and identify 3 non-tariff protectionist measures. Identify the components of the current account. Explain 2 causes of an increase in the current account deficit. Remember, deficit, one of those commonly misspelled words in economics, D-E-F-I-C-I-T, ladies and gentlemen. And then finally, the 18 marker on FP, fiscal policy, discuss whether a reduction in taxation will always increase a country's economic growth rate. So that was June 2015. June 2014, case study, Turkey emerging out of the mist. So this is about the mist economies and the mint economies. Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and in this instance Turkey. So you're given some inflation and unemployment data in this particular case study, and you're asked to do the following. 3 components of AD. Come on, how easy. How do you determine equilibrium in a macro environment, simply where AS equals AD? A little bit about monetary policy, and I think there were a few things which were allowed on the mark scheme. So you're allowed things like your standard sort of base rate, money supply. You're allowed to talk about quantitative easing, and you're also allowed to discuss the fact that if there's an inflation target in place, that's a form of monetary policy also. Again, compare data, higher, lower, faster, slower, averages, etc. Comparing the mist nations, Mexico, Indonesia, South Korea, Turkey, with the BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China. Comment on whether an increase in saving will reduce inflation. Identify reasons why governments seek to achieve economic growth. Identify determinants of future economic growth, determinants of consumption, the multiplier. This was, I remember marking this paper actually, very badly done, this question about the multiplier. when it's a lovely topic actually, the multiplier, so get stuck into that. Know a little bit more, I would say, than just what's in the textbook. Calculate the size of the current account deficit, and then finally, this is a current account essay. Discuss whether an economy will always benefit when the current account of the balance of payments moves from deficit to surplus. 18-mark question, and a nice question, I think, that one. And finally, June 2013. Let's see what was on June 2013. So the data you're given was a change in China's priorities, so the case study material, a change in China's priorities, and on this one you were given inflation data over time. Now, note well, ladies and gentlemen, the obvious thing is that if you have inflation data falling, so say it's going from 2% in the year 2000, then in the year 2001 it's 1%. Well, of course, that does not mean that prices are falling. You've really got to be careful about that. The exam board deliberately try and trick you with that type of question. If it goes from 2% to 1%, it simply means that prices are still rising, but at a slower rate. So be very careful on something like that. So what were you asked to do on this one? Identify withdrawals and injections. That would be from your circular flow of income. I, G, X, S, T and M. Identify determinants of consumption. Do a calculation. You can see the trend, the pattern here. Calculations and comparisons of data all the time. Define inflation. Explain inflation data. Explain the causes of inflation. When it says explain inflation data, that's what I referred to at the beginning about comparisons over time. Will an increase in the rate of interest lead to a fall in investment? Supply side policies. Now, supply side policies, you could write a list of 15 supply side policies if you really put your mind to it. I would say, however, really make sure that you know all about privatisation, and obviously with what's going on with the steelworks, Tata at the moment, and the whole issue of nationalising a private industry, it's very important. Comment whether low unemployment should be the government's main macro objective. So that's all about policy conflicts. Your Phillips curve diagram, the fact that if you try to reduce unemployment you may force inflation upwards, all that type of thing. And then finally, this is more a monetary policy question. Discuss whether a rise in a country's exchange rate will always reduce its inflation rate. 18-mark question. So you can see our essays for the last 3 sessions. We've had a monetary policy, we've had a current account essay, and we've had a fiscal policy one. So, in the same way as I did for F581, I'll do for F582 in that I will now look at the specification. Let me bring that up for you. So here we have the specification for F582, and again F582 is in 3 parts: aggregate demand and aggregate supply and their interaction, government economic policy objectives and indicators of national economic performance, and scrolling it on to the final section, the application of macroeconomic policy instruments and the international economy. And so what I've done again here is to look at what has been assessed, what's been assessed on the right hand side of this spec, and then to consider what might be assessed in the future, i.e. June 2016. So in terms of your revision focus, ladies and gentlemen, for June 2016, here are the areas I think you should be focusing and concentrating on. So in section 1 of the spec, aggregate demand and aggregate supply and their interaction. Maybe consider these areas more than others. Defining aggregate demand. Explain why AD may shift. Explain why AD and AS may shift. Now here's one which I think you really need to look at. Show a general awareness of the multiplier and the concepts of leakages and injections. So this whole relationship between injecting money into an economy or pulling money out, remember the multiplier can work in a positive and a negative direction, very important issues. And then finally, here's a potential essay question. Discuss how changes in aggregate demand and aggregate supply may affect output unemployment and inflation. Now that's simply lifted straight off the specification, and that would be a tremendous essay, wouldn't it, ladies and gents, if you got that? Next one. So the second area of the spec, government economic policy objectives and indicators of national economic performance, focus on these areas. So be able to define economic growth, unemployment, the balance of payments, income redistribution, economic stability. I remember economic stability being on the paper about 5 or 6 years ago, and the definitions of it were dreadful, so look at that one. Understand the objectives of government policy in terms of growth, employment, inflation, balance of payments, stability, distribution. Be able to define GDP and real GDP and know what does this term real mean. Make sure that you know. Explain how growth, unemployment and inflation are measured in the UK. We have had a question in the last 3 sessions about one of these. I can't remember exactly, it was possibly inflation, but make sure that you know how to do those things. Make sure that you know the difficulties associated with measuring either of these. Make sure that you're able to explain the causes of unemployment or a surplus on the current account of the balance of payments. We've had questions about a deficit in the last 3 sessions, but not a surplus. Discuss consequences of unemployment, inflation, a deficit or surplus on the current account of the balance of payments. So this is a potential 18-mark essay question. Obviously it's a discussion question, and you could be asked to discuss unemployment or discuss inflation or discuss current account position. Alternatively, you could be asked to discuss the costs, benefits and sustainability of economic growth. Now that hasn't been on the paper for quite some time. Quite a straightforward essay, so a nice one to prepare for. And finally on this section, outline how exchange rates are determined by the demand and supply of currencies. We haven't really had a lot on exchange rates of late. And then finally, the application of macroeconomic policy instruments and the international economy. Things to consider on this one would be, make sure that you can define fiscal, monetary and supply side policy. Discuss using AD and AS the ways in which supply side policies can affect unemployment, inflation, growth and the current account. Explain the advantages to be gained from international trade. Now there's something which hasn't been on at all very much in the last few years. And explain tariff and non-tariff methods of protection. Now that has been on, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that again. So I think that's it, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed. So in terms of F581 and F582, those are the potential areas that I would be focusing on, ladies and gentlemen, for June 2016 resits. So I wish you well, I wish you luck, and I hope your revision is going well.